As we get started, I wonder, Irwin and Hanan, if you would just maybe share a little bit about your background and your relationship with each other. How do you know each other? How long have you known each other? That sort of thing.
Okay, I will go first. So pre-COVID, let's start pre-COVID. I was very active with a group of folks in Petaluma who were considering themselves progressive, and a lot of them did go to Irwin's congregation. So I had heard of him, didn't really know him. I think I ran into him one time at some kind of vigil downtown, didn't really engage. And then I was asked to help plan the Petaluma Progressive Festival. I think this was in 2019. And we were very mindful of our speakers. We had someone who was representing for Palestine, and Irwin was asked to speak as well. And there was a portion where Irwin was singing, and there was supposed to be someone playing drums, and they didn't show up. And I'm like, well, I know how to play tablet. I can play the Palestinian tablet. So it just like happened organically. But then we got some not great feedback about Irwin being Jewish on stage and not speaking about Israel-Palestine. And, I ended up kind of writing a response that I don't feel like, simply because I'm Palestinian or simply because he's Jewish, we always have to be talking about this. I understand that perspective, but I also think that I expressed that there's so much more to who we are that is not necessarily directly connected to that. But then, we'd see each other around. And then this last year or so, we've been working really hard together.
Yeah, there were many unexpected rendezvous at Oliver's.
Yes.
But yes, after this war started, really very early on, Shalom, at the suggestion of Mia Ziman, invited you, Hanan, to come and have a conversation at the table. And this was like the beginning of November 2023. So it was really very early. And I think what we did that night, which drew some flag, but mostly what we tried to do that night was also to speak from our hearts and see where it would lead us. And we did. And I think one of the things that we learned was that, one of the things for me that was important that night was the listening and letting go of the need to respond to everything that got my nervous system tense. Knowing that no conversation is going to cover all the territory and that a conversation doesn't have a winner.
Yeah.
And so it's okay to let go of some of this response and to let the conversation keep going, knowing that we will have, if we do it right, we will have a lifetime to keep having this conversation.
One of the things that we talked about ahead of this afternoon was we talked about the pitfalls of one person sort of often being tasked to speak for a large group of people. So there is a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew up here, but we're not speaking for Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. We were not elected by these groups to speak wholly on behalf of billions of people. And so that was one of the pieces that we talked about what it is to just speak to our own experience and the pressure we feel sometimes to represent a perspective. I wonder if either one of you wants to say more about that.
Okay. Well, I can speak. I suspect that Hanan has experienced this even more than I, in the nature of how our various communities are held in the United States. There's probably more room for me to be an individual and not a representative. I don't know. But I have noticed that since October 7th, there have been a lot of calls for calls for loyalty, calls to speak a certain party line, that has really erased the range of experiences that people have, has erased the different relationships people have with Israel, with Palestine, with Palestinian friends. You know, for me, I was feeling a call from different directions. I was feeling a strong call from mainstream Jewish organizations to, you know, to speak in defense of Israel in certain ways. I was feeling a call from pro-Palestinian activists to speak up in a certain way. And for me, that puts me in a position of really always disappointing almost everyone, which I fully expect to do today as well. And that's a hard place to be, like, you know, especially for an Enneagram 2 people pleaser like me. You know, I don't want people to be unhappy with the things that I say, and I carry that with me somewhere in my gut. And that's a piece of my learning. That's a piece of what I'm trying to learn, is that I don't have to say yes to what I am told to believe or what I am told to say. And I can live in the discomfort of people not being happy with my declining that invitation.
Oh, yeah, I think my answer is going to be kind of a completely different approach, because I think what most Palestinians, if I ask a Palestinian American right now, what was a question you kept being asked over and over and over, especially the first 6 months, and it is, do you denounce Hamas? I can't tell you how many times I was asked that. Huffman asked me that.
That's Jared Huffman.
Jared Huffman, yeah. Jared Huffman asked me that, and at some point told me, you Palestinians need to take responsibility. And what I started noticing more and more is there was no space for me to be simply a human being. I was instantly connected. The moment I say I'm Palestinian, I'm instantly a political conversation. I'm instantly like responsible for anything bad any Palestinian has ever done, and I probably know all of them. You know, it's just, recently I offered to be a speaker at a People's March in Sonoma County, and I was declined because they didn't feel like a Palestinian is a local voice, and I hadn't even said I wanted to talk about Gaza. So I think what I've experienced in that realm is being assumed that we are a single dimensional people. You know, I'm queer, so there's that, you know, and the reason they didn't want me to speak is it was said that Hamas and Palestinians kill gay people. I'm gay. So, you know, I think what I've experienced is sometimes folks might have done some anti-racist work during BLM, right? But like haven't really been able to take that and apply it to the Palestinian identity and don't realize that they're being racist.
Let's just all breathe in together. Time in and out. I want to lift up in this conversation is power. I think power is really important in this conversation because, you know, after our conversation leading to today, we talked about how it is, how often folks are expected to answer for a group, right? Or when you're expected to answer for what Israel's done, you're supposed to answer for what Hamas has done. And I think about that often. I mean, conversations with progressives, especially with non-religious people, and they want me to answer for what Christianity has done. And I hold that tension. And what I want to name, what's different here is power, which is that there are reasons why my voice is unwelcome, and I am sometimes mistreated in the United States. Being Christian is not one of those reasons. People are usually surprised to find out that I'm Christian. And so that's a piece too, when we think about dialogue, right? What often, even if we're asking every person to do the same thing, based on the situational power around us, we're sometimes putting more responsibility on other folks, right? So I'm mindful that when I'm speaking as a Christian, I'm speaking as a person who benefits enormously from white privilege when I'm talking about Christianity. And so when someone wants to share with me the harm that Christianity has done with them, I feel like I can meet them there because that is not an edge where I feel unsafe. Far from it. This is a country that even as it grows in secularism, continues to still center Christianity in weird and unfortunate ways. We don't need to say more about that. To make a shift because of something, Hanan, I just heard you name about naming to folks that you're queer. You'll be stunned. I'm also queer. The person who formed the drag ensemble is also queer. And ahead of today, I mean, I did some research online. I could not find an interfaith panel on Judaism and Palestine that was made up entirely of queer folks. This might be the first. And I guess what Nan and Irwin, what does being queer, how does that support the kind of dialogue that we can have with each other?
I think again, generations within like the queer community, a generation is about 4 years or 5 years. So from my particular generation, I think growing up queer and coming out and living into a queer life is a kind of practice of being skeptical or suspicious of convention and then questioning your own beliefs, right? Because when I was growing up, there was no discussion about gender, and I had to, and for me it was obvious that gender was conventional, it was a construct, and I had to conform to fit in, and so eventually I stopped trying to fit in. And what ended up happening over time is that structures of power became, for me, suspect. So when power said, this is the way things are, my reaction became, really? Is that true? And I don't know, if I hadn't been queer, I don't know if I ever would have questioned gender, if I ever would have questioned all sorts of things. And I've wondered about the fact that as a rabbi, I am so alone in having supported ceasefire and having opposed this war. I mean, I know plenty of rabbis who are like me in that way, but they're generally not in synagogues. They're generally doing other kinds of work. And I wonder about like why in this county, I was the only rabbi that came out for ceasefire, and my congregation then came with me to do that as well. Sorry, it's very strange. And I think a piece of it is the queerness, that it was easier for me to let go of my investment in what the state of Israel represented to me in childhood. It was easier, I mean, not easy, but easier. It was not a big leap for me to say, maybe this isn't true. Maybe I need, and I think that growing up queer trained me to be able to do that a little bit better, or a little bit more, with a little more facility.
Could you see if there's an empty seat for someone who just came in?
I think it's feeling right there. Thank you.
I honestly don't know that there's a lot more that I could add to what Irwin just said, because everything he just said really resonated. Aside from just to build on it a tiny bit in that, you know, a part of being in the LGBTQ plus community is embracing nonconformity. You know, we have jokes about lesbian haircuts. Is it number 1, 2, 3, or 5? You know, and you know, it's like we give ourselves the freedom and permission to express ourselves very, very obviously and sometimes in your face outside of social norms. It is a way that we kind of give ourselves freedom. We're already not going to accept us. Great, we're going to dress however we want because we like it, you know, kind of thing. So living in that world and also knowing that other people in the LGBTQ plus community is like really family to me. I feel like they're very much family. We understand each other in ways that we don't always feel understood outside of those spaces. So living in that world, you already know that whatever society we're talking about, whether it be just, you know, whatever, Sonoma County norm, whatever that is, Palestinian, whatever that is, Jewish, whatever that is, we're kind of on the outskirts of it anyways. So we don't, speaking for myself, don't feel like I fully live in it, right? I love it. I love the Palestinian culture. I love Palestine. I love to cook Middle Eastern food. I love to listen to Beirut. All of that is true. And I also know that I live on the outskirts of it because of this other piece of my identity, which pushes me to be able to have conversations with others on the outskirts of their identity. We can meet in these in-between spaces. So I think it very much sets us up to be able to have those conversations. There's more, but I'm going to stop there. Yeah.
The only thing that I would add is that I'm old enough that when I was, and I'm from a really conservative place and from a small town, I did not know any adults who were out and gay. I just knew that I was different, and I had to imagine what that would be like. Like, what world would I live in? Like, who could I be when I became an adult? And I think for me, that put into me at a very young age, like we have to imagine that another world is possible, that another reality is possible, because the what I was seeing was not going to work for me. So what would it mean? What would it mean to kind of step off the edge of that? And I think that influences my social change work, is that we're not there yet. And I don't even think we can see where we need to go yet. That's why we need this, for me, it's the power of divine imagination to imagine what's coming next. Something, Hanan, I heard you touch on is what I would consider is just sort of hearing you name as a queer person, maybe not always feeling welcomed in certain cultural spaces. And one of the things we talked about leading up to today was biases that exist within our respective cultures, and how we can fall, how we hear people fall into old stereotypes, not just folks on the right, but folks on the left as well, when they're talking about different identities, particularly Palestinian identity, Jewish identity, Muslim identity. I wonder if you want to say a little bit about those biases, about how we've experienced them, how we resist them.
In the queer community?
Within the Palestinian community, the Muslim community, but maybe also how those things are used against you.
As a queer person?
Yes.
Okay. I think I understand.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Can you say more? I don't, yeah.
So we talked a bit about how stereotypes about Jewish folks and about Muslim folks in particular sort of have permeated American culture, right? Not just on the right, but on the left. And often we hear folks say, well, that doesn't exist on the left, or that doesn't exist in liberal culture, or that doesn't exist in Sonoma County. And you all named that you've had different experiences with those, and I wonder if you can speak to that, speak to those experiences.
So I'm just gonna go with like the Muslim identity. something that's been coming up for me a lot, and I just shared a very recent experience I had with a supposedly progressive organization putting on a supposedly progressive event, and they proclaim to be pro-diversity and anti-racism and all of this. And then, there's a saying, it's you're progressive on everything but Palestine, right? But it goes hand in hand with Islamophobia. And I think that it's become, I've always been aware of it, but this last year and few months, it's become abundantly obvious to me that white liberal spaces, there is a lot of Islamophobia that exists that folks don't see, and they find ways to do the fancy liberal talk around it to make it sound like they're not being Islamophobic, when that is exactly all it is. And I think that there is an othering that happens, and that Islam feels mysterious to most Americans. And a lot of the Islamic communities that move here have moved here and stayed to themselves, kind of often haven't really become a part of American mainstream culture. 9/11 kind of forced folks out a little bit. But there's still this mystique around it and a lot of misunderstandings about what Muslims even believe or practice. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what direction with this. Yeah, the Jewish community in the United States is a much more assimilated community than the Muslim community has been. In some ways, the position of the Muslim community in America is not dissimilar in certain ways to where the Jewish community was in Europe in the past century. Kept separate in lots of ways, some official and some unofficial. I think it's actually really quite important for people to study Islamophobia and study anti-Semitism. I think our activism of every sort is better when it's cleaner. And if you are using the word Zionist as a stand-in, as a seemingly acceptable stand-in for Jew, then it's not clean. Because there's plenty to critique. But sort of once there's that blur, then you're no longer in a position to be able to persuade people, to be able to win hearts. Certainly not Jewish hearts. And I think for the struggle for some kind of peaceful future in the land, we need Muslim hearts and Christian hearts and Jewish hearts. They all need to be part of this. I think that there is a tendency, for reasons we could talk about later, but I think there's a tendency in the American Jewish world to see pro-Palestinian activism by Americans and American students as anti-Semitic per se, and that's wrong. And it's not devoid of anti-Semitic edges that really need to be looked at and aired out a bit and discussed with some subtlety, so that everyone who believes in some kind of change is making the best argument they can make, and the most the holiest argument that they can make.
There's one piece I just want to add really quick, because I think there's a large piece that gets overlooked when it comes to the Palestinian identity and connecting it to Islam, is that Christianity came from that area, that region. And I have two friends in here who are Palestinian and Christian. And so when the third oldest church in the world was bombed by Israel in Gaza, and Christians were inside and they died, it was crickets from most American white Christians, which told me it is not about religion, it is about race.
Mhm.
It is not that we are Muslim, it is that Islam tends to be a religion of darker people. And if you're Christian and you're dark, then you don't matter as much.
I imagine many Christian communities in the United States who are BIPOC would agree that, right, when we talk about, when white nationalists talk about the attack on Christianity, they're not talking about the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church. They're not talking about the shooting that happened in North Carolina a number of years ago, right? That they're substituting in Christianity for whiteness,
Yeah.
and a particular kind of whiteness, which is very much a non-Jewish whiteness. I see that a great deal, I think, when, and Hanan, I appreciate you sort of naming this critique of Islam as being homophobic, right? And I always find that fascinating coming from Christians, as if like, I don't know, did Jerry Falwell convert to Islam, right? Like that's ours. And I feel like that's maybe a separate discussion we have together, but that communities around the world of different ethnicities, races, and religions have this have homophobia baked into them, and so it just feels like it's a tool that's weaponized in the name of race.
I'm going to take this in a different direction just slightly. I am going to share something really personal, but I've been very open about it. So I was married very young. I was married for 13 years, and my ex-husband was pretty abusive. And when I share that story, I'm going to tell you 8 times out of 10, people ask me, was it because he was Arab? And it'll never not take me off guard, but I have learned to ask, I don't know, are there abusive men in America? It's the same thing when people are like, but you wouldn't be safe there. I don't know, am I safe here? I have experienced a lot of really scary homophobia in Sonoma and Marin County. I was surrounded by the Proud Boys in Petaluma, but that's okay. We deserve to live safely, but they don't. Yeah.
We talked, this is maybe a good segue into this. We talked about, because we didn't meet at Oliver's, we met at Reverend Cafe. Have our pre-meetings. And we talked about really what was at the heart of this conversation. And at the heart of this conversation, we said was what it means to rehumanize everyone, right? That dehumanization is the beginning of genocide. Dehumanization is the beginning of eradicating another person. And that these conversations are very much about rehumanizing and remembering the full humanity of each other. I wonder how, even in the midst of this time, which is in many ways complicated and painful, and it just feels like we're on a merry-go-round of terrible things that are happening. How do each of you do that work of continuing to remember the full humanity of others, particularly people who disagree with you or you have difficult relationships with?
Not so merry-go-round.
Not so merry-go-round, yeah.
It's hard for me to hold a lot of hatred. I'm kind of not built for it. And so, and obviously there are people who are built for it, but it's hard for me. And so I think I very quickly go to a place of wanting to hear individual story, wanting to listen. I mean, I think listening is really key, and you know, and a piece of what I've seen happen in Israel over the last 15 months is, you know, sort of a trauma response that makes it very hard to see Gazans as people. I think that the holding of hostages in Gaza has kept a lot of the Israeli public locked in a kind of present moment trauma. And I think that's something that like we don't always appreciate at this distance. How do we insist on our own humanity and the humanity of others when we are in the middle of trauma, or in a reactivation of trauma? I haven't, I love the dialogue that we have, and I wouldn't expect necessarily a similar kind of dialogue to happen between actual Israelis and actual Palestinians living in the land. I have enough distance that I feel like I can listen, and I won't be traumatized by listening. I also feel like if we can't do that here, there is no hope of it happening there. If we can't do it, if we can't use the little bit of distance that we have for some benefit, for some blessing, then how can it happen there? And that said, there are people doing it there. There are people that are insisting on continuing to rehumanize each other, and to see each other and talk to each other. And that's happening every day. And I marvel. The Parents Circle, an organization called the Parents Circle, which is family members of Israeli and Palestinian families of people who were killed in conflict. And they have this organization together, and there have been so many sort of peace organizations that collapsed on October 7th. This group, like their ability to see each other's humanity and to hold the depth of experience, to hold it so strongly, has kept them even more present and active and doing the deep work of listening and caring than ever before. And I marvel at their ability to do it. I don't know if I could. If I were in that situation, I would like to think I could, and I haven't, and God willing, I won't be put to that test.
Just going to build on, I think that it is an extreme privilege for us to sit in self-righteousness here. Of course, we can feel angry and sad and disappointed and, full of righteousness, but to be so self-righteous that we can't listen to someone else, we can't humanize someone else, we are causing damage for the people who don't have voice. If we can't work through our own self-righteousness, our own anger, our own defensiveness, our own triggers, and sometimes we have to take a break. I've taken a break. But I think that if we're truly, truly trying to be in the cause of bringing about an end to violence for people who don't have a voice right now, or at least don't have the resources we have, then we have to get out of our own ways and be willing to have the hard conversations, which includes listening and hearing things that you don't agree with. Because people aren't going to listen to us if we're not listening to them. Right?
Mm-hmm. We talked about that at length, about the toxicity of this calling out culture. Particularly, we talked a lot about it in the pro-Palestinian movement by people who are themselves not Palestinian, right? That the centering of the voice. And I'll say this, and then if you want to offer a critique, you can. If you're feeling smug self-righteousness about speaking out on something that is actually not a cause that is directly impacting you, you're probably doing activism wrong, right? Because it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy where I won't listen to someone else because I'm so right about something, and then we just get more and more pigeonholed. Do either of you want to say more about that? Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
I know that it is a common experience. My daughter is 24. She's amazing. and she lives in Tacoma. She was a part of the student movement that got Evergreen to divest, which was the first university in the US to do that. And she is just powerful human. But we have like compared kind of experiences, her in college and her kind of earlier 20s in a different state and me here, and very common experience between us. And I know for others as well, and not just within the Palestinian cause, I know it happened a lot in BLM, is we need our allies. Let's be really clear. It is the most important piece of this struggle is that we're not alone. But we need our allies to know that they need to listen to us. They need to hear us. And sometimes they need to follow us, you know, not tell us what we should or shouldn't be doing, which has happened. It's a thing that happens. People of color at times get pushed out of their own movements because white privilege does still exist, even in activism circles. And sometimes we're just not aware of it.
And on the other hand, there were many things to do. But on the other hand, yes, I think that's really, it's so important. And I also don't want, if there are folks here who have been doing activism, who were part of the encampment last year or whatever, I also don't, it is important for people to use their voices, to do it respectfully, to figure out where I fit in the picture of what's going on. But, you know, we have, you know, we are 2 days into a ceasefire, and it is an imperfect ceasefire, and it's making no one tremendously happy, but it could not have happened without international support for ceasefire, and that includes student activism. And I think it's also important to feel some pride in, okay, I used my voice in this way, and combined with all of these other voices, there was some effect. And we can't wait for the perfect thing to happen before we say, oh, good job, because the perfect thing will never happen. But if we've done something that feels, you know, 2% more like peace, it is worth feeling, it is worth noticing it and feeling it.
That's such a good point. I think sometimes, especially those of us who are more progressive, we fall into this place where like I'll have a litmus test before I'll be willing to have a conversation with someone. Do you check these boxes? Do you agree with me in these political pieces? And for me, I just speaking for myself, that is quite frankly very lazy allyship. The truth is that if I have done any work for social change in this world, it is because I have been willing to listen to people. I have been willing to listen when I've been in a privileged space and when this conversation is not exactly impacting or harming me, when I've been able to show up and listen. And then as a queer person, I know that people who are allies for me will show up and have difficult conversations with people who are homophobic, right? Like this is what allyship is it doesn't cost me anything to listen to someone with whom I do not agree on Gaza, on Judah. It costs me nothing. As an ally, rather, I actually think it's my privilege. It is my privilege to show up and say, I am going to listen because if I listen, you are more likely to be able to listen, right? I want to show up and say, if I can understand you, you are more likely to be willing to try to understand me, right? We can find this common ground and we can even just ever so slightly, right? We can begin the healing of the world just by saying, okay, let's humanize this a little bit more. Yeah.
So one thing I did think about, and in allyship, when we are working together, you know, I think back to some things. My son goes to UC Santa Cruz, and there were some things starting to happen with students that he was working with that he kind of started stepping back, not feeling safe as a Palestinian to participate. So I think that's something that, happened in BLM as well. If you are in activism and you're fighting for, a marginalized group for their rights and you're not a part of that group, pausing to think about actions and words and how that comes back to that group. How is that representing the group that you are standing up for and fighting for? Is that going to cause harm? Is that going to feed into negative stereotypes? Yeah.
I also, I think it's important not to rule out people as potential allies.
Amen.
Because I actually, one of the things that, when October 7th happened, and then the Israeli ground invasion began, and then the numbers of deaths started climbing so steeply, I thought to myself, there is a natural allyship here waiting to happen among people who love and care about Israel and people who love and care about Palestine. Because who benefits from this? Like, who benefits from all this death and all this destruction? And even if, Israel benefits in the short run, Israel will not be benefiting in the long run. And I feel like there were so many missed opportunities for allyship because of preconceptions about what will a Jew think about this, preconceptions about various things, also about the leaders that ran to their corners and held their corners and made it so that there was something disloyal about Jews who were working for the benefit of a Palestinian future. But Jews who are working for the benefit of a Palestinian future are also working for the future of Jews in the region as well. Right? There is no peace in the future. There will never be peace in the future unless it's a peace for everybody. And so, we weren't going to talk about policy there, but the relevance of it here for me is that this idea that, for instance, in a student community, there are two camps. That I think it's worth questioning that. I think strongly identified Jewish students and students who are strongly identified as proponents of a Palestinian future, of some freer Palestinian future, have things to say to each other and have places that they can meet and do things together. And I think it's a terrible shame that people were forced into a kind of adversariality that has been a waste of time and energy and a great loss of possible friendship.
That wasn't too policy. That was all right.
Okay.
Yes, I feel really, this is maybe the whole ballgame. I think there's this, so in community organizing, we talk about something in terms of, you always show up with your self-interest, right? It's not your selfishness, it's your self-interest. It's why you care about something. And if you want to live in a world in which there is peace, you must care about one another. Beyond any sense of virtue, right? Like if we want peace, we find it together, right? If we want to live in a world in which people listen to us from the start by listening, right? If we want to live in a space that feels compassionate and healing, then we have to begin with compassion. And I do have I think too often we kind of draw these lines, right, that prevent people from talking at precisely the time when dialogue is most essential. Can I give a last word before that?
Yeah. I want to agree, and I want to add this last year and several months, especially in the beginning, there are a lot of us, me and Bev, for instance, who are willing to do anything and talk to anyone to try to get people to listen, to try to get ceasefire resolutions passed through city councils. And we ended up putting ourselves in positions that honestly caused ourselves harm, energetically, psychologically, So yes, we have to be open to conversation. But we can't have conversation if the other side is not willing to have conversation. And so it is a really nuanced thing, right? Trust yourself. I didn't listen to myself in some of those conversations when inside of me it was screaming, no. This person is not who they're presenting. This person is not actually interested in having the conversation that you think you're having. But then trust yourself when it's a yes. This person is showing up. Maybe they're saying something that feels hard to me. I know I'm saying things that feel hard to them, but we have a commitment to one another to hear each other and to move together through this, right? So don't put yourself in a position that causes harm because you're wasting your time and you're hurting yourself.
Yeah, and I see that's the piece of why we're in this work together, right? Because I hope that when there are conversations that are hurtful for you, if it's someone worth talking to, I hope that as an ally, I can show up and start conversations. I hope that we can do that work for each other. And certainly like have an awareness of what it costs us, but also remember that this is long-term. This is long-term work that we're in, so we need to be able to sustain ourselves.
And it won't always be, it won't always be happy, comfortable work. You know, and I think a lot, after Bernice Johnson Regan saying, you know, coalition is not home. You go home for home. But in coalition, you have to be with people who disagree with you, see things very differently, and that can be really uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable is something that we have to get used to. It's not harm, but it is the place where we can meet and try to create something new.
So speaking of being uncomfortable, now we're going to move into the question and answer. So just a quick word on question and answer. A question is different than a comment. You can, if you need to give half of a sentence of a precursor before your question, you can. No doubt, some of you are very moved and your personal story connects well with Hanan's or Irwin. They're going to be here for a minute afterwards. There are going to be ways that you can connect with them, especially if you're a student. So if you want to share that story, this time is not the time to do that. That'll be the time after. But for right now, what we're going to do is open up the floor for students first. You share a brief intro to your question. And then ask the question. Ideally, your question is a question we can all engage with, but if there's something that somebody said in particular that stood out to you, it's okay to draw attention to that. We'll go to Sophia first, and Sophia, I'm going to ask you can say your question, and then I'm going to repeat it back into the microphone just to make sure that everybody can hear you.
Great. My question is, how, like when you as a public figure made a statement about what was going on, how did the treatment from your overall community, not specifically just like essentially your congregation, but the people that you relate to the most, how was the overall reaction?
So
that is geared a little bit towards Rabbi Irwin specifically, but I am curious to hear.
That's great, Sophia. So when you made a statement, how did your community respond, particularly those who are closest to you?
My Ner Shalom community, I'm proud to say that my Ner Shalom community responded with not only with enthusiasm, but with gratitude, because they felt like, again, they also, like many Jews in this country, felt like they were being required to espouse a particular view, that they couldn't say, we want ceasefire, or we want peace, or we want anything. And other than the destruction of Hamas. And I received a lot of gratitude. I will say people joined the synagogue. There were people who in the post-October 7th felt a need for Jewish community because they were feeling alone. They were feeling worried about anti-Semitism, but they needed to join a synagogue where they could actually say, we care about Palestine too. So actually on the synagogue level, Baruch Hashem, I think we did very well. more broadly, I did get emails saying very terrible things. And those were hard. Because we also published a piece about our process that went to the Bay Area Jewish community and was reprinted in the Forward, which is a national magazine, and people looked up how to write to me. And, call me, anyway, it doesn't matter what they called me. It was terrible. And it was important to me that looking back, I felt like coming from a Jewish people who were practically destroyed in Europe without many people objecting, it felt important to me as a Jew that I be able to look back and say, I spoke.
I actually want to answer too,
Oh,
but
please.
so before October 7th, I was very involved in Sonoma County social justice, Sonoma County community leadership. I was asked to speak at various things, often representing that I was Palestinian and queer or Muslim, something along those lines. I was not prepared for what was going to happen, which was when I started speaking up for my people. I lost friends, I lost allies, I lost community, and I had a really hard crashing realization that, I knew I was being tokenized, but tokenization stopped when I wanted people to actually care about my actual identity.
Yeah, I would also just say that this is where I think it's so important to speak out as allies. I know there have been times that this is just what happens when you're a public figure, is people write you and say terrible things about you, even if they don't know you. And there have been times when it has been about things that I have said that I care about deeply but are not core parts of my identity. And that's very different than when an attack comes that is about a core part of my identity. And that's why allyship is so important, because that's the way it means to stand together in these moments. Yeah, great question, Sophia. Let's go here in the front, then we'll go to you.
I guess this is mostly for Hanan, but also Irwin. Do you feel an allyship that the birthright trips are still happening? Do you still feel like there's an allyship in there? Or I don't know if I'm asking it right.
I think what you're asking is the birthright trips are still happening for Jewish folks to go to Israel. And does that affect how I feel like in allyship with Jewish people? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
And that's a good question, actually. The easy answer is no, because the Jewish people, if we're framing it in that way, who I feel in allyship with, well, for the most part, may not necessarily support that concept. I haven't asked everyone, and frankly, it's probably not any of my business what people think around that sometimes. But no, that's a really good question. I think my short answer is no. That is not right now the forefront. Do I think it's equitable? No, because there are so many Palestinians all over the world who cannot return to Palestine, who don't have a right to go to their ancestors' land. I can't go to where I know where my family's from. I can't go there. I can't live there. I sure as heck I'm not going to get a free ticket there. So it is painful to know that that exists, and it doesn't exist for me or for my children. Does it affect the way I see Jewish folks in allyship? No.
I don't have a big answer for this. The birthright trips are full of agenda, and I don't steer people into birthright trips. But if a young person is excited that they're going, I don't say, oh, you shouldn't go, but I do sit them down and say, I want to talk about the things they're not going to tell you and some questions that you might ask. And you might not actually get a full answer, or a real answer, but these are questions you should have in your mind when you go. I mean, I do have an investment in young Jewish people loving Israel. I have an investment in them having enough investment to want a different future. I feel like young Jews who are utterly disinterested are not helpful in the process of building something, creating something better, allowing something better to evolve. So I don't know. Yeah.
Don't go on conservative Christian trips to the Holy Land. Just don't do it. There's nothing ambiguous about that. Okay, next question in the back.
My name's Julia. My question is primarily for Hanan, but it's kind of for the whole panel, anyone who wants to jump in. When you were speaking initially and just introducing yourself, I was struck by how many parallels there were in your experience of life as a Palestinian American and my experience of life as Jewish American, both queer, both from, backgrounds that really inspired pride in our history. And I'm curious what your opinion is on how you see those bridges forming in the future and how you see conversations happening that cross the divide in ways that are respectful and understanding of, I think, the emotionality that a lot of Jewish people tie in with the conversation around Israel. Even speaking for myself, this whole conversation has been very emotional. How you can tie in an understanding of that with an understanding of the real pain and harm that is continuing to be done to Palestinian people, both in extremely violent and very tangible ways in Palestine, and also in more subtle, nuanced ways in the US and abroad.
So what I'm hearing is, how is it that as a Palestinian queer person, do I feel or think that these conversations, meaningful bridging conversations, can happen with queer Jewish people when there is this like kind of huge imposed divide? How do we overcome that and have conversation and be in conversation and be in community? Because queer community is a very strong and important community that we live in. My answer is it's happening. So in this last year and several months, I will say I have developed a whole new set of family members in this movement. And I would say a solid 70% of them are queer, and at least half of those folks are Jewish. So I just visited 2 of them yesterday to see their baby, and I'm called auntie, and they're both Jewish, and we've done a lot of work together. And I think the biggest thing is that honestly, we have more in common than we don't between Jewish and Palestinian folks and our experiences in this world and our identities and the way we're seen and the way we're treated. And I deeply believe that what is happening for a lot of Jewish people is that some people in power who have a lot to gain are capitalizing on ancestral trauma to instill fear of othering. I don't think Jewish folks or Palestinian folks gain at all in what's going on, even those who live there. It is the people in power. I think it has a lot to do with oil. I think it has a lot to do with money, and almost nothing to do with cultural identity, history, or religion. So it's about us really unlearning the things we have been told, realizing that our fears are being weaponized against us so that we don't talk to each other. If we are divided, then they win. And that goes with everything in the United States right now, right?
Oh, yeah. Beautiful, thank you. And we had talking about ancestral trauma, and it was on our list of let's talk about this. I think for me, growing up when I grew up here in the United States, I think that I kind of convinced myself that anti-Semitism was a thing of the past, and that the traumas of the past were a thing of the past. And what I've been observing in this past, during this war, is just really kind of extreme trauma responses among my fellow Jews. And I think we don't always identify that that's what it is, but I feel even in my own bones, like since this war has been happening, I feel it as an existential threat, like an existential threat to the Jewish people. And you know what? I don't think it actually is an existential threat to the Jewish people, but this response comes from generations and generations of pogroms that I thought was in the past and had nothing to do with me other than as a historical story. But I feel it in my own body. And I think one of the things that we can do to help each other is to notice this and to interrogate it and to to hold it with compassion. Like, I see you're reacting as if your life were in danger, you person living in Rohnert Park. And to notice that, when you notice it, it helps. But I think that that's there, and I think that's a piece of what has been fueling the conflict that we've been having in this country.
And I just want to say feelings are real. It's not always reality, but feelings are real, and we have to be able to validate one another.
So Lindsey, can I interject real quick? So just a note to students in the classroom. I know you're looking at your watch thinking lecture is over. So we commonly go past the 5:15 mark here by a few minutes, and we will today. I want all students to stick around after class. So if you're in the 5:30 section, I want you to stay. If you're in the 7 o'clock section, I want you to stay for this first class, first discussion section after class today. So don't go anywhere.
Time is a construct, but feelings are real. I just want to name that piece of this generational trauma piece. It's true. People carry trauma. It's passed on generation to generation. Pretending that trauma is not real gets us nowhere. And listening to another person's pain is the beginning of rehumanizing. That's just such essential work. Yeah. We'll take 2 more questions. I saw this hand first, then we'll go to you. Go ahead.
Hi, so my main question was about identity. So, this is for all three of you being sort of members or leaders of communities that are based off a certain one main aspect of identity. There was a lot of talk today about how connecting to a certain part of identity can bring up trauma, and it can cause sort of being forced to choose loyalty or being put into a position of being seen as one-dimensional or the representation of people that you don't want to necessarily be connected to or really don't have any reason to be. But then at the same time, there's obviously been a very big threat of how community based off of identity can be a really good thing, can foster a lot of healing. And so my question is sort of just in the culture of our society today, what do you think identity and senses of individuality can, how can that help, and what do you want to see in the future as far as that goes? If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of going back to the queer thing, there was a time in my life when I thought I couldn't identify as Muslim because I'm queer, right? And a lot of religions have a lot of ideas about. Oh, the question was essentially, how do we resolve our varied identities and with the challenges and the benefits of those identities. And I started seeing a queer Muslim therapist who helped me understand that the very amazing thing about being queer is we get to pick and choose what we want to be, and because we're already not accepted, generally speaking. And so it was so freeing that I can belly dance in my living room and I can drink black tea and mint and I can say I'm Muslim and nobody can tell me otherwise just because I'm queer. So I get to choose what I want to welcome in my life, what feels empowering, and then I get to connect with others who accept those parts of me.
I think there's another piece that has to do with healing, and that sometimes the reason to explore your identity and greater depth, greater breadth, or to find what are the practices, what is the tea that I want to drink. You know, a piece of that is about healing, healing from the traumas of our ancestors, and also healing from the ways that the majority thinks about us. And so some of it is about choosing what to act, but what to act on. But some of it is also part of a really important process of personal healing.
I'm gonna say one more piece is kind of adding on, it is also rejecting that one dimensionality that I was talking about earlier, right? If I am rejecting that, then I am not limiting myself. If I find myself limiting myself, then I'm likely internalizing some of that.
I think for me, and I'll just speak about this in terms of my religious identity. Often folks assume that there's some like headquarters of a religion somewhere, and they hold all the power of the religion and they get to dictate what the traditions are. And there is a place called the Vatican. Religious identity and religious tradition, for far more of our history, has been practiced in the home than it has been practiced in some central place. Your religious tradition, whatever tradition you've inherited from your ancestors, it belongs to you. So no one gets to tell you that you're not a part of it, right? No one gets to define for you whether you get to be a part of this community or not. I often encourage the young people at my church. I often encourage them, like, reclaim the parts of your Christian tradition that make sense for you and practice them freely, because queer people have done that for 2,000 years, right? They've maybe not been centered, but they have absolutely been people who have led these communities. Nuns, priests, all these, lots of queer folks in our Christian history have carried this forward, and this is an opportunity for you to own it. No one gets to tell you how you can practice your faith, or how you can hold a part of your tradition. Yeah, we'll go over here.
My name is Max, and I have a question for all of you. Rabbi Keller, you said that pro-Palestinian protests are being mixed with anti-Semitism, and on the ground in front of the encampment last year was written, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They then wrote over that saying Hamas is a resistance movement, writing over terrorist organization. And Hamas is a globally recognized terrorist organization, which its main goal, stated by their charter, is to kill Jews. So how do we get to peace from here?
I think Hamas and the Netanyahu government will never bring us peace. It is not in either of their interests. People can. And I think it's important to find who are the Jewish Israelis and who are the Palestinians who are trying to do something different, trying to try something different, and follow them, support them, follow them. I don't think I have anything more to say about that.
I have never held a gun in my hand. And I have never seen my child killed in front of me. And I've never not had food to give them. And I believe deeply in anti-violence, non-violence. And I know that there are so many different perspectives on so many different things in this world that I cannot claim to fully understand. But I think if we are so busy focusing on who the bad guys are and not focusing on who the good guys are and the humanity of it all, and we're just feeding into the division, I don't know what makes someone decide to join Hamas or the IDF. I don't know. I know I probably could never do that. I also know I've never lived their life. And that goes back to trying to understand, and it is extra hard to try to understand when we feel threatened, when they've done something egregious that we could never even see ourselves doing. How can you begin to understand that? Well, I know that my life has been pretty damn privileged, and I have never had to make choices like that.
This speaks to something that we talked about words mattering and words having consequences. And this is a critique I have of folks on the right. It's also a critique I have of other people like me who are on the left, is that often we make bold statements about things because we think that's like taking a stand, right? And especially when you're putting those words into writing and leaving it somewhere. So I don't have to answer for those words I put there. I'll just leave them. I'll just drop them in the chat box. I'll just like put it up on social media, and that's like me taking a stand. When folks make bold declarative statements, I think it's always worth asking, is this building power? Is this building community? If it is not doing either, then it's worth asking why you're saying it. Because often I feel like those statements come out just because someone feels like this is like, I'm pissed off and this is the thing I want to say. And this is the thing I want to write and I want to X out with something. And we can go back and forth. I mean, that could be a whole line, right? That could be like a whole block of cement, right? Two people could have kept writing back and forth. And I think that the question underneath that is what does that accomplish? Because for me, that is not how we work for peace, and that misses the conversation with people who are willing to be in dialogue about things that matter.
One of the things that makes me think about is about the trickiness of using sort of conclusory political language.
Yes.
You know, it's like I would not argue with you, frankly, if you were to say it, but I don't need to arrive at whether what's happening in Gaza is genocide or not. I don't need to, because all I have to do is look at what's happening, and it is horrific in ways that I can't imagine. What happened on October 7th is horrific in ways I can't imagine, and I don't need to find what is the political term that I can pin this onto, terrorist organization, or we have seen the Israeli army do horrible things, and because they're for all of the reasons they don't get the label terrorist organization, and I, as a Jew, am like relieved that they didn't get labeled as terrorist organization. But we have to look at what is the experience people are having, what are the things being done, and respond to the brutality of that, and the longing for something different. I think once we attach labels onto it, then we're really in our heads. Then we're really having a different kind of discussion that's not happening anywhere here, anywhere in our bodies, anywhere in our and we can have those conversations, and some of those conversations are very interesting, and I'm not certain that it's the conversation that I want to have. I want to have the conversation where I can feel I can feel compassion, I can feel the pain, and I can feel the compassion, feel the pain of my people and feel the pain of your people, and feel compassion for both. That's where I want to be in this.
I will say just this one very brief thing. I think a lot of us are probably aware of the fact that the term terrorist is nearly explicitly used for people of color.
So as we're moving to wrap up, I invite us, let's all take a moment, breathe in and out. Irwin and Hanan, what is one thing you just want to offer folks, I think particularly the students here, what is one thing that you see as a as a way forward. Work with peace, passion.
First of all, students, I'm really sorry we've handed you this world. We didn't do a good job of talking to one another across the tables. Not here, not across the world. We were too busy being right, self-righteous, and othering one another. And we've destroyed our country because of it. All of us. On all sides. And now we have to learn how to talk. We have to learn how to hear. And we have to learn how to understand and how to be human with one another. We have to remember that everyone really just wants to be able to have a home and have food, keep their children safe. Really the basics. It's not that hard, and we are all being manipulated. We have to talk.
It is painful to do so, but I think it's important to move through this life with an open heart. It's really easy to shut down. It's really easy to fall into rhetoric or ideas that people hand you prepackaged. But your heart isn't going to lie to you. Your heart is a place where you're going to be able to find some truth. So an invitation to move through this life, difficult as it might be, with an open heart, and to keep planting seeds of kindness and peace everywhere you go. And don't worry if you don't see it blossom immediately. Talmud has a story about planting a carob tree. It takes 70 years. You plant it for your grandchildren. Keep planting those seeds. Just keep planting them without worrying if they're sprouting right now. And I think that looking back, you won't regret having done that.
What I would just share is come with an open heart. We can also come with a critical lens. I think often if you're handed something that seems too simple, well, those are the bad guys and those aren't. It's probably more complicated than folks are telling you. And if someone tells you that something is complicated, so you don't need to be a part of the conversation, if it's complicated, it matters. It absolutely matters to be a part of difficult, complicated, uncomfortable conversations. I wish you a whole life of being uncomfortable. And just also offer, there's this prayer written by a Christian mystic who we know as Saint Francis, those of us. He ends his prayer with, he asks God, he says, grant that I might not seek to be consoled, but to console, that I would seek not to be understood, but to understand, not to be loved, but to love. That is the prayer I come back to again and again. That is with the kind of the prayer I pray before I enter a difficult conversation, that I would seek first to love the other person and to understand the other person rather than simply make myself understood. I am so grateful for these friends here, for Irwin and Hanan, and for their vulnerability and openness. Can we show our appreciation? Centering this conversation. I'm also grateful for Sonoma State, Stephen, welcoming us. I'm grateful for each of you for being here this evening and for giving us your attention. Thank you so much. And we'll be down here for a little bit to answer some questions. Yeah, thank you.
And a huge thank you to Reverend Lindsey.